Okay, so I'm finishing up my lunch, but I want to go ahead and if you have some questions, I want you to write them down, or not write them down, write them on the chat so we can get to answering them. Basic. Okay, so real quick, I just went and got Wendy's 4 for 4 because it's the best. Anyway, so I'm eating my fries. Sorry, but someone broke my straw. It's like a dirty trick. So I don't have another straw, so I have to. Anyway, how inconvenient is that? But, mm, all right, let's get this out of here. So you don't have to hear me chew. All right, let's see how many people we actually have here right now. Four. Four of my favorite students. Anyway, so what we're going to do here is we're going to go through this a little bit as we just go through the slides. And I think if you can explain your way through this slide here and this slide here, yeah, we can do the valves, we can do the tendons, yep. This slide here and this slide here, if you can explain your way through that and draw it, then I think that'll work. Yep, we can go over the way the blood flows. Yep. Okay, which, yeah, I mean, so you're kind of already going there. So um, when it comes to the, let's see, let's do Ellie's first. So the valves and the tendons, okay? We have valves that are between the atria and the ventricles, and then we have them between the ventricles and the arteries, right? So we have this atrioventricular valve, and on this side is the what is it? Tricuspid valve, right? Yes. Anyway, and then on the left we have this atrioventricular valve, which is the bicuspid or mitral. Okay, and so one of the ways that when blood, so let's do the flow, and then we'll get into the chordae tendineae and the papillary muscles. Sorry, you can hear me drinking my Coke. Anyway, so we have superior and inferior vena cava. That is bringing back all the deoxygenated blood back to the heart, right? And the collecting chambers, which are the atria, the one that collects the deoxygenated blood from the rest of the body, is this right atrium. Hi, Joe. This right atrium will collect that blood. Enough blood will collect in there. Blood will spill through this tricuspid valve and start to fill the ventricle. We will have a slight contraction out of this right atria to go ahead and get the rest of that blood in there. Right? Once this thing fills up, the ventricle will start to squeeze. That will increase the pressure, and if you think about that squeezing, that's going to push blood up this way, and it's going to shut that valve. Okay, the chordae tendineae and the papillary muscles are designed to not let the pressure of blood that has closed them build so much pressure that it pushes the valves that way and allows the blood to go backwards, to go back up into the atria. Ellie, does that make sense? Does that make sense? So we fill this, goes through, get a slight contraction, goes through the tricuspid into the ventricle. The ventricle squeezes and it builds pressure because that valve's going to close and then that valve's actually going to remain closed. Once we build enough pressure, it'll blow through that valve into the pulmonary trunk, out the pulmonary arteries that go to the lungs. Okay? And like we showed yesterday in the video, the lungs are all surrounded, the heart is nestled inside, and so this right ventricle really doesn't have to pump that hard. That's why the wall is thinner. Okay? That's why the atrial walls are very thin, right? Because they only have to go to there, right? The right ventricle only has to pump to the lungs, and then once it is in the lungs, we're going to get it pumped back to the heart on the pulmonary vein. Pulmonary veins. Okay, we can see one coming in here, and here, and here, and here, and they're all going to dump into this left atrium. The left atria is going to do the same thing as this over here. It's going to fill with blood. It's going to push that valve open. It's going to spill down into here. We're going to get a slight contraction here. It's going to cause blood to go in there. Then this sucker is going to contract, build the pressure. That's going to close. The chordae tendineae is not going to allow for that valve to be blowed all the way back that way, and go the other way. That's what they call mitral valve prolapse. We'll talk about that towards the end of the chapter. And we have the parachute strings that are holding it. Okay? The same thing's going to happen here. It's going to build pressure, which is going to close that, and it's going to be enough to open that, and it's going to squeeze, shoot blood into this aorta, which is going to go to the rest of the body. Okay, so it's a lot of pressures. This is building pressure. This is building pressure. The pressure here is enough to close this valve and open that one. The thing about these valves too is these are all one-way valve. Okay, if we didn't have a valve here, if we squeezed and shot blood up in there, well, then blood, as soon as the contraction was over, the blood would fall back down in here and fill this up again, and less blood would come from there to go into there, and it would just be pumping a lot of the same blood, which would be extremely inefficient. All right, so intelligent design. Okay, so Garrett, does that answer your question as far as flow? So when the slide down here that comes into, where is it? This one here. I mean, that's your flow. That's your flow written out on a list. Okay, so this whole right side of the heart is your pulmonary circuit, because all this is going to pump to the lungs, and then the systemic circuit is the left side that's pumping to the body. Okay, so that's what we did here. We just explained that through. So if you can draw this out and you make these steps, so I mean, here's a structure, there's your collecting chamber, through a structure into a discharging chamber. So through a structure into pulmonary trunk, into the pulmonary arteries, to the lungs. Okay, so if you can draw it out, then this whole page you know. Okay, so I got this up, so I just wanted to see if we could, let me see, that's showing very well. Yeah, it's showing good. So if we
to
watch,
supply the tissues.
no, we don't need to hear this. You're going to see how blood fills, it goes in, and now that's happening really fast there. Squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. Okay. Now, one thing that this is kind of doing is it's not really super accurate, because what it's showing is that all this blood just shoots and there's all this space here. Really, it's just a constant flow, and there's always blood in there. And so, this thing's annoying me. Anyway, and so that but that it's not really representing how this valve keeps blood from coming back into the ventricle. This valve isn't really showing how it keeps blood from coming back into the ventricle. This one kind of shows it as the pressure builds. See how that pressure right here, now pressure is building, okay? It's building so much to where it hasn't blown through the semilunar valves, right? The pulmonary, semilunar, or the aortic. And then soon there's enough pressure. Now we have enough pressure. These are closed. So the pressure's so high, so it's gonna eject blood out of this into here because the pressure's high. That's the only way out. So therefore it's unidirectional. Okay. Okay. So any other questions? This looks like a hard slide, like I said, but we just went through that and we should know that. If you have a hard time, if you draw out your blood flow and you feel like you've missed some steps, this would be the one to go, okay? You would just follow your way all the way through, okay? Your heart sounds are the valves closing, right? So if you have a stethoscope or if you've heard one and you hear the bump, 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 it goes like bump, 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 right? Or bump, 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 okay? Closing of the AV, closing of the semilunar, closing of the AV, closing of the semilunar, okay? That is your heart sounds. Okay. Other questions? Let me see some here. Let's see who we have. 7 of you. Hey, wow, I'm impressed. You guys must be bored. Okay. So we have that. Okay. I want to make sure that I get your questions if there's something you want to go over. Let me go back to here. Let me go to here. Okay. What is this? Oh, and then, sorry. Then there's this, right? One of the things we wanted to make sure that we got through was that when the blood is inside the heart, it is not being used by the heart. Okay? It's kind of like a red blood cell. Red blood cells carry oxygen around. If they were using it up as they were moving it around, it would be kind of inefficient, right? They wouldn't be able to carry as much, especially if they had to go a longer distance. I mean, if they only had to go a short distance, that red blood cell probably wouldn't use up that much. But if it went from excuse me, if it went from the heart all the way down to the big toe, well, then it could use up more oxygen and therefore not deliver as much oxygen as it needed. You see what I'm saying? I'm not saying it would do that, but so the same way with the heart, right? So the heart is a bunch of muscle. It needs oxygen to use for aerobic respiration, to make energy, to make ATP, to make all that kind of stuff. Okay, so if it used it while it was pumping it, that would be that's less desirable. So since we have that, we have right and left coronary arteries, right? We have a right and a left, okay? And when we look at this, it is more important. The left one tends to be a little bit more important, okay? Because it delivers blood to a whole bunch more muscle. I mean, look at that. Here, look at this. I mean, this isn't to scale. But you look at this and you look at that. What would you say? 4 times thicker over here than this? So this side of the heart is going to demand a lot more oxygen, okay? And if we damage this side with a heart attack, with starving off blood and killing some muscle tissue, now that means our ability to efficiently pump blood through the whole body is compromised, and that's a problem for healing. The ends of the tree, the ends of the line, the tips of your fingers, the tips of your toes, all that kind of stuff, that the thing that's furthest away may suffer a little bit. Okay? Now, if you notice, these arteries are coming off the aorta right away, which means this heart is wired so that it can get blood at even a lower pressure. Again, intelligent design. If this doesn't work, this if this doesn't get blood, this doesn't work. All right, so it gets pressure right off of the aorta, one of the first branches. See these? Okay. Then you're going to find that some of these other ones that take off up into the body are feeding the head and the brain. Okay. Yesterday we showed that video of again this here blue is representing your pulmonary side, and red is representing your systemic side, right? Deoxygenated and oxygenated. And real quick, I'll get you guys' feedback on this. As I was thinking of this, technically next week is spring break. So whether or not I should or could or will give you a quiz on Monday, I don't have to. I can wait till a week from Monday when technically spring break is over. I don't know what you guys were planning on doing. If you were planning on taking the whole week off and you don't want to do it and you just want to get back to whatever, or what. So anyway, questions? Any other questions? Question mark, question mark, question mark. Oh, what have we missed up here on the top? Pressurized system. We got to deliver that oxygen. We got to make that exchange. We got to refresh the fluids. Location, thorax, right? Posterior, superior, the base of the towards the right shoulder blade. The apex is toward the left hip. It's about the size of your fist. Weighs less than a pound, right? You can kind of see how it is nestled inside these lungs here, or in between the lungs. And so, again, right ventricle doesn't have to pump that far since it's all around. That's why there's not a ton of muscle there. If your lungs would happen to be in your shin and they had to go all the way down there and then come back up to the other side of the heart, I would imagine, we could all assume, that the right ventricle wall would be way thicker because it has to go farther. It needs more pressure to get there, and also push it back, right? So, anywho, so you can kind of see here how it's positioned. It's really, a lot of it's based, it's underneath your sternum. Then we talked about these coverings, right? The visceral pericardium and the parietal. The visceral being on the heart, and the parietal being on the cavity that it sits in. And in between we have this fluid that keeps the friction low. Epicardium, myocardium, right? So we had this is the visceral pericardium. Myocardium is the contracting layer. The inner is endothelial, reduces friction, right? We don't want turbulence. We don't want rapids. We want a nice smooth river. We don't want rapids. We're not whitewater rafting. Okay, so let's see. The atria, the auricles. Remember, the auricles are like the zipper on your carry-on. Here we see this right circumflex, left circumflex, right anterior descending. Okay, this one here, this is the widowmaker. You get a block up here and you starve that whole ventricle. It ain't good, people. That's why they call it the widowmaker. So no other questions, really. Nobody's got anything. Everybody just misses me and wants to hear my voice. How many we got on here? 7 still? But again, the nice thing is that you can go back to the other videos and review this. There's really not that much material on this. Collecting chambers, discharging chambers, septum, superior and inferior vena cava. Remember, like the armpits, or I always say the nipples up, that is pretty much the superior vena cava's job, and the nipples down, that is the inferior vena cava. Pulmonary trunk, pulmonary arteries, right? And so again, this one here, by definition, arteries pump away from the heart. Okay, 95%, 99% of the time, what? They're pumping oxygenated blood, except for these pulmonary arteries coming from the right ventricle, from the pulmonary trunk. And then we have oxygenated blood coming back on veins, going towards the heart to the left atrium. Okay? These terms right here, bicuspid or mitral valve, you need to know that. Most of the time people will use the mitral valve when they talk about the AV valve between the left atria and the left ventricle. Semilunars. Pulmonary semilunars on the right side, aortic semilunars on the left. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else I really need to know. That again, here you're going to see building pressure again, and then enough pressure to eject through the semilunar valves into either the pulmonary artery or the pulmonary trunk or the aorta. It's all a pressure thing. Pressure. I just wonder if this thing would work. Nope, it doesn't. Of course it doesn't. Lub dub. No problem. No problem. No problem. Okay. I think that's pretty good. So the big question is this: are we taking the quiz on Monday, or are we waiting till next Monday? It doesn't matter to me. I mean, technically, you can just listen to my lectures again and have it, but and no one is answering me. Down to 5. Ooh, yikes. Of course. We have dissenting opinions already. I may do it Monday, and then you guys can do your corrections throughout the week next week and get them in. Again, I'm not going to be able to watch you and keep you from using your notes. So, and I don't really care too much. So, really, you guys should all do pretty well on these quizzes. But, anyway. So, we'll probably go ahead and do it. I'll send it to you on Monday. And then I just want you to get it turned back in on Monday. Okay? And then I can lecture next week. You guys can email me and let me know what you think. But I can lecture next week, and I might lecture anyway and just have them there. You don't have to do them. And we'll just, because really you got technically 2 weeks, but anyway, we'll figure it out. So we'll say next week is pretty much spring break, and but we'll do this quiz so that you guys don't forget it. Okay, so I'll do it on Monday. I'll send it. Just have it turned back in on Monday. I'm not going to police you about your notes, so I guess you can probably do that. So anyway, you guys have a good weekend. I don't think I'm working next week, so I might be doing some of these at home. But anyway, all right. You guys have a good weekend.